the king. I got to tell you, poker's his thing. Booze, ladies, keep me right. As long as we can make it to the show tonight, we're an American band. We're an American band. We're coming to your town. We'll help you party it down. We're an American band.
All right, hi there. Today I'm going to be covering for Algebra 2, Chapter 4-5, solving quadratic equations. So let me start with what's called the zero product property, which you don't really have to know. You should know how to use it. And what that says is basically if I have two things that multiplied together equals 0, and then one or both of them have to equal 0. So for example, here I've got two things that multiplied together equals 0, the x plus 5 and the 2x minus 1, which means either x plus 5 equals 0 or 2x minus 1 equals 0. And this is going to give me my two answers by simply solving those two like I know you can. So I subtract 5 from both sides and I get x equals negative 5. Over here I can add 1 to both sides. Those cancel. I got 2x equals 1. Divide by 2. And I get my second answer, x equals 1/2. 1 divided by 2. Okay? So those would be my two answers. This one is similar, number 2. The only thing that's different here is that I got 3x, and then I got inside the parentheses is x minus 7, but those are the two things that multiplied together equal 0. So either 3x equals 0 or x minus 7 equals 0. Here I divide by 3. 0 divided by 3 is 0. I add 7 over here. I get x equals 7. And those are my answers. Nice and easy, huh? All right, then you come up to these kind of problems, and this isn't too bad either. This is got a quadratic equation there that equals 0. Now, what I'd like to have is like number 1, where I got two sets of parentheses multiplied together equaling 0. So, because then I could solve it, which means in order for me to get the two sets of parentheses, we're going to factor. So, things that multiply to 6 and add up to negative 5. So things that multiply to 6 would be 6 and 1 or 3 and 2. Now to get them to add up to a negative number, either they both have to be negative. All right, I can't have one positive and one negative because that wouldn't multiply to negative 6. So even though you'd think that might work, negative 6 and 1, it doesn't because those multiply to negative 6, not positive 6. So the only one that works is this one. If I make both negative 3 and 2, make those both negative. So I got negative 3. What am I doing? I'm not splitting down the middle because there's nothing in front of the x squared. I'm going straight to my parentheses, x and x. In the parentheses goes minus 3, minus 2. I'm not done. Don't write down that those are your answers, negative 3 and negative 2, because they're not. What they'll actually be is the opposite in this case. X minus 3 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0. Add 3. I get x equals 3. Add 2. X equals 2. We good? All right, if you got questions on that, please bring it to class. All right, so that's that one. Now, just a quick reminder here. When I'm solving these, there's graphs that go with all of these, and there's one of 3 situations that happens. And it's best to think of this from a graphing point of view, I think. The first situation that happens, and this is probably the most frequent, is that curve comes down. It's a parabola. Maybe it opens up, maybe it opens down, but it comes down and it crosses the x-axis. That's really what we're doing is you're finding where it crosses the x-axis. We're putting a lot of work into that. In this case, you get 2 solutions. Okay. Now, occasionally that parabola will come down or go up, and it'll just barely touch that x-axis in one spot, which will give you one solution. Okay. Now the third scenario that happens, and it's not uncommon, is the parabola comes down and it doesn't hit the x-axis at all, which means that there's no solutions. So those are my three different cases, all right, and realize that all of them will come up, okay. All right, so next one. I'm on number 4, okay. So the directions are going to say factor and solve. Sometimes they also might say find the zeros. And sometimes they also might say find the x-intercepts. These three things are all the same, okay? So anytime they ask for one of those, they're all interchangeable. You're finding the same things here, you know. Think about that graph, you know, those are the zeros where it crosses the x-axis there, which are also the x-intercepts. Okay, so now that we got that straight, let me go back to my problem. The equation that I'm going to be factoring and solving is this one, 6x squared minus 5x minus 4 equals 0. I'm going to factor and solve it. This one's different because I got that 6 right in front of the x squared, makes it more difficult. So I'm going to go a times c, which is negative 24. And then I'm looking for the factors of negative 24 that add up to negative 5. And with a little bit of quick work, you know, 12 and 2, 8 and 3. Ooh, 8 and 3 look good because if I make the 8 negative, then they add up to negative 5. Which is what I want. I want them to add up to the middle term. All right, so it doesn't matter whether I put the negative 8 first or the 3 first. Negative 8x plus 3x minus 4x equals 0. Bring down the 6x squared. Draw a line down the middle and factor by grouping. Okay, so if on the left side, I can pull out a 2 and an x, which leaves me with 3x. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 8 divided by 2 is 4. I had an x, but I pulled it outside over there, so there's no more x on the 4. This one, 3x minus 4, there shouldn't be an x on that. I made a typo. It should be just 3x minus 4 because I just brought down the 4. 3x minus 4. There's really not much I can pull out, but you can always pull out a 1. All right? And it's actually important to pull that 1 out because when I'm writing down my two sets of parentheses, I don't want to just have 2x in one of them. It's got to be 2x plus 1, remembering that what's outside the parentheses is one of the things I'm going to write down here, 2x plus 1. The other one will be what's inside the parentheses, 3x minus 4. Since my parentheses matched, that was good. Now this all equals 0, and I'm not done because I got to go 2x plus 1 equals 0. And 3x minus 4 equals 0, and then solve them, all right? And this will only take you a minute. Subtract 1, I get 2x equals negative 1, and then divide by 2, you get x equals negative 1/2. All right, over here I'm going to add 4. I get 3x equals 4, divide by 3, I get x equals 4 over 3, and there's my two answers, okay? All right, so next, quadratic formula. Many of you don't like factoring, and life is not over. There is another way to do these problems, and it's called the quadratic formula. And it's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. And you know, this where a, b, and c come from is the equation. Also, this thing under the radical this radical and all that stuff. That's called the discriminant. Okay, and we're going to talk about the discriminant a little bit more later, but just realize that that's what that is. So when I come back to it, you'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's see, what number am I on here? I'm on number 5. The question, this one's going to say solve, and I got 6x squared minus 5x equals 4. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I need to bring everything to one side of the equal sign. Start by bringing everything to one side of the equal sign. All right, now it doesn't matter which side, I'm going to bring everything to the left side, okay, because it's going to be less steps. If I go like this, subtract 4 from both sides, I'll get everything on one side. 5x minus 4 is 5x minus 4. Okay. All right, now that I've got that, now I can start. I'm going to go what A, B, and C are. I'm going to say A. Remember, A is what's in front of the x squared, which is 6. B is what's in front of the regular x, which is negative 5. And C is your constant term, the regular number, which is negative 4 in this case, okay? And then I'm going to plug everything into the quadratic formula. X equals negative b, right, again, plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so I get negative 5 plus or minus negative 5 squared minus 4 times a is 6, and c is negative 4, all over 2 times 6, which is a. All right, now I'm going to start simplifying this, all right? One thing to note, anytime you're substituting numbers in for variables, you use parentheses, which is especially important right here because that is always going to turn out to be a positive number, okay? All right, so back to this. Negative 5 is positive 5. I have a double negative. I already said this is going to be positive 25 here. I lost a parentheses on that. Now this one, I always take an extra moment to look at this. How many negatives do I have here? I got a subtraction and I got a negative. So 2 negatives will make a plus. If there's only one, it would be negative. If there was 3 of them, it would be negative. If it's an odd number of negatives, it's negative. And 4 times 6 is 24. 24 times 4 is 96. All over 2 times 6 is 12. All right, so here I am, getting there. Okay, 25 and 96 is 121, which is a nice thing because that's a perfect square. So the square root of 121 is 11. All right, now I'm going to split up the plus and the minus, okay? Plus, minus. So up here I got 5 plus 11 over 12. Down here I got 5 minus 11 over 12. Okay. 5 plus 11 is 16 over 12, which you can reduce into 4 over 3. That's one of my answers. 5 minus 11 is negative 6 over 12, which is negative 1/2. And those are your 2 answers. Okay. So, I know it looks like a lot of work. I showed every single step along the way there too, all right? But you will get the answer every time pretty quickly that way. And the more you do them, the quicker you'll get at them. Number 2, or not number 2, that was number 5, so I'm on number 6. Find the zeros. And I got negative x squared plus 48x equals 300. Okay, so once again, before I start, I want to bring everything to one side of the equal sign, which means I'm going to subtract 300 here. And I get equals 0. I got negative x squared plus 48x minus 300. Now I'm going to write down what a, b, and c are. I always do that right on the side. I find I make less mistakes. You know, sooner or later, if I go in there to pull c out a whole bunch of times, sooner or later I'll pull out positive 300 instead of the negative 300. And I find if I write them on the side over here, I make less mistakes. Now, what's a? A is what's in front of that x squared. There's an implied 1 there, so that's going to be a, all right? Okay, plug it into the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a is negative 1. All right, so here we go. Start simplifying. Negative 48 plus or minus the square root. Nice big numbers here. 48 squared is 2304. This one, I got negatives coming out my ears on this one. 1, 2, 3 of them. So it's an odd number. It's going to be negative. If it's even number of negatives, it'll be positive. 4 times 300 is 1200. All over negative 2. That fraction bar goes all the way across. All right, next. Negative 48 plus or minus the square root of 1104 all over negative 2. And then, let's see, 1104 is not a perfect square. So write that over here, square root of 1104. So I'm going to use a decimal, 33.2. I'm going to round off. I'll make that equal sign an approximate sign, a wavy equal sign, because that's an irrational number, because anytime you take the square root of a non-perfect square, you'll get an irrational number. So I'm going to break up the plus minus. This one will be the plus 33.2 over negative 2. This one will be the minus, so I got negative 48 minus 33.2 over negative 2. And now you punch those numbers in your calculator. Make sure you hit equals before you divide, all right? So your calculator, if you go negative 48 plus 33 divided by negative 2, and don't hit equals in between, you'll probably get the wrong number, because you'll probably only be dividing the 33 by negative 2, not the whole thing. So if you do this correctly in your calculator, you should get 7.4. And down here I get 40.6. All right. So those are my two answers. That's what x equals. Okay, now next one, 7. Solve. And it says the equation is 0, equals x squared plus 4x plus 5. Okay, so that one. So quickly, a equals 1, b equals 4, c equals 5. When I plug this into the quadratic formula, I get negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. All right, this one is a little bit more interesting because what happens is, quickly I'll get, that's 16 minus 20, which is negative 4 all over 2. Square root of negative 4, if you punch that into your calculator, you get error, which means there's actually no solution to that one. Now, you better go back and double check that you didn't make a mistake with the negatives, but in this one, there's no mistake. There's only one subtraction sign there, which means it's going to be definitely subtraction. So just going back to what we talked about with the graphing thing, what that means is, that parabola does not hit the x-axis. A is positive, so that's going to open up. This will not be a perfect diagram by any means of what that graph looks like, but it'll be something along those lines where you can see it never hits the x-axis, okay? And that's what happens there when the discriminant is the square root of a negative number, okay? Now, for the next one, before I get to number 8, if b squared minus 4ac is a positive number, I will get 2 solutions. If it's a negative number, I get no real solutions. If it's 0, I will get 1 real solution. So just by, some questions will simply ask you how many solutions it has, in which case you can just plug A, B, and C into the discriminant here, b squared minus 4ac, and see what you get. If you get a positive number, you get 2 answers. If it's a negative number, you get no answer, no solution, no real solution. And if you get a 0, that means it's 1 answer, okay? So, for example, if I gave you number, I forget what number I'm on here, 8. I gave you number 8 and said, how many real solutions does x squared plus 4x plus 4 have? I can plug those answers right into the the discriminant, square root of b squared minus 4ac, and figure that out. Once again, a is going to be what's in front of the x squared, which is 1. B is what's in front of the x. C is the regular number at the end. So if I plug those in, I get the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times c is 4, which is 16 minus 16, which is 0. So I got 0, which means if I go back up here, you can see I'm going to have 1 real solution then. So that's a shortcut to, instead of doing the whole thing out, and which will also work. I mean, I could do the entire quadratic formula and figure out how many answers there are. Is there 1 or 2? But in this case, it would only be 1. Or you can just do the shortcut, which is kind of nice too. All right, so that's what I got for today. I'm going to close it out with a little bit of music, and I'll see you all soon.
On the show, feeling good, feeling right, it's Saturday night. The hotel detective, he was outside. Now these fine ladies, they had a plan. They was out to meet the boys in the band. They say, come on dudes, let's get on. And we proceeded to turn back to